The hotel lobby was glowing with gold light and polished marble, the kind of place where people spoke softly and money spoke loudly. Guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses moved across the floor as if they belonged there. Every step echoed luxury. Then the front doors opened. A man walked in quietly, no entourage, no cameras, no announcement. Just a tall figure in worn jeans and an old travel jacket, carrying himself with calm confidence. His face showed no exhaustion, no urgency, only patience. It was Steven Seagal, though no one in the lobby seemed to recognize him at first. He approached the front desk slowly, waiting his turn like everyone else. Behind the counter stood the hotel manager. Mr. Dalton. His suit was sharp, his smile selective. He greeted wealthy guests warmly, laughing loudly, handing out room keys with exaggerated politeness. When Steven finally stepped forward, Dalton barely looked up. "I'd like a room for the night," Steven said calmly. The manager glanced at him, once, quickly, and his expression changed. The smile vanished. His eyes scanned Steven from head to toe, lingering just long enough to judge. "No rooms available," Dalton said flatly. Steven nodded slightly. "I understand. Could you check again?" Dalton sighed, annoyed, tapping his keyboard without even looking at the screen. "Fully booked," he repeated. "You'll have to try somewhere else." Steven glanced around the lobby, empty chairs, quiet corners, a row of room keys hanging neatly behind the desk. "Are you sure?" Steven asked, still polite. "I don't need anything fancy." Dalton leaned back, crossed his arms, and finally looked directly at him. "This is a premium hotel," he said coldly. "We don't have room for people who can't afford it." The air shifted. A nearby guest stopped mid-conversation. A receptionist froze. Someone coughed nervously. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, calm and silent, absorbing the insult. "Sir," Dalton added louder, making sure others heard, "there is no room for you." For a moment, the entire lobby waited. Steven Seagal slowly reached into his jacket pocket, and in that moment, no one realized that the man being turned away wasn't just a guest. He was about to change the fate of everyone in that hotel. Steven's hand remained inside his jacket for a moment longer than necessary. The manager noticed. His eyes narrowed, and his posture stiffened. In his mind, this was the moment where things usually went one of two ways. Either the guest backed down quietly, or they caused a scene. Dalton was prepared for both, but Steven did neither. He slowly removed his hand and placed it gently on the counter. Empty. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Steven said calmly. "I just need a place to rest." Dalton scoffed, "And I've already told you we're full." Behind the desk, a young receptionist named Emily watched nervously. She had seen this before. Guests dismissed, not because the hotel was full, but because they didn't look important enough. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Steven noticed her hesitation. "Is there any chance?" he asked softly. "That one room might still be available." Dalton turned sharply toward Emily. "Did I ask for your input?" Emily flinched and lowered her eyes. The lobby grew quieter. Guests who moments ago had been absorbed in their own conversations now pretended to check their phones, listening without looking. Dalton leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening. "Let me be very clear," he said. "This hotel doesn't rent rooms to just anyone who walks in off the street. You don't fit our clientele." Steven met his gaze steadily. "What exactly does your clientele look like?" he asked. Dalton smiled thinly. "People who belong here." For a brief moment, Steven's eyes moved across the lobby, over the chandeliers, the artwork, the expensive furniture. He seemed to take it all in, as if seeing the place for the first time. "I see," he said quietly. Dalton straightened, feeling victorious. "Good, then we understand each other." Steven nodded, stepped back from the counter, and turned slightly as if to leave. A few guests relaxed. The tension eased. But then Steven stopped. He turned back once more, his voice calm but firm. "Before I go," he said, "may I ask one thing?" Dalton exhaled loudly. "What now?" "If this hotel were truly full," Steven continued, "why are there still keys hanging behind the desk?" The question landed harder than expected. Dalton glanced back instinctively. Several keys were indeed visible, neatly arranged. The receptionist swallowed hard. "That's none of your business," Dalton snapped. "Those rooms are reserved." "Reserved for whom?" Steven asked. "They've been there since I walked in." Dalton's face flushed. "I don't have to explain myself to you." He raised his voice deliberately. "Security." A uniformed guard stepped forward from near the entrance, hesitant. "Yes, sir." "This man is refusing to leave," Dalton said sharply. "Escort him out." The guard looked at Steven, then at Dalton, uncertain. Steven raised a hand gently. "There's no need," he said. "I was already leaving." He turned again toward the exit, but something stopped him. Emily's voice, quiet, almost a whisper. "Sir, I'm sorry." Steven paused and looked back at her. "For how you're being treated," she said. "It's not right." Dalton spun around. "Emily, one more word and you're done." She froze. Steven looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said. Dalton laughed bitterly, touching. "But this isn't a charity hotel." Steven stepped toward the door, pushed it open, then stopped just outside. Cold night air rushed in. He turned back one last time. "I hope," Steven said calmly, "that one day you're judged by something other than your appearance." Dalton rolled his eyes. "Get out." The door closed behind Steven. For a moment, the lobby returned to its artificial calm. Dalton adjusted his tie, smoothed his suit, and smirked. "Some people," he muttered. Then, Steven did something no one expected. Through the glass doors, he pulled out his phone, not angrily, not dramatically. He made a single quiet call. "Yes," he said. "I'm at the Royal Crown. Please come inside." He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and stood still. Inside the lobby, Dalton watched from a distance, confident, dismissive. He had no idea that in less than a minute, everything he believed about power, status, and control was about to collapse, and that the man he had just thrown out was about to walk back in with the authority to change everything. Steven remained outside the hotel, standing just beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights. The night air was cool, quiet, almost peaceful. Inside, the Royal Crown Hotel returned to its polished rhythm. Soft music, murmured conversations, the gentle clink of glasses. At least, that's how it seemed. Behind the front desk, Mr. Dalton felt a strange restlessness creeping in. He told himself it was nothing, just another traveler turned away. Another reminder of who controlled the doors of this place. He glanced toward the glass entrance. Steven hadn't left. He was standing there calmly, hands at his sides, eyes focused. Not angry, not embarrassed, just waiting. Dalton frowned. "What is he doing now?" he muttered. Emily noticed too. "Sir, he's still outside," so Dalton snapped. "Let him stand there all night if he wants." The security guard shifted his weight. "Should I ask him to move away from the entrance?" Dalton waved him off. "He's not hurting anyone." Still, Dalton couldn't stop watching. Steven didn't pace. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look frustrated. He simply waited. Seconds passed. Then headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. A black luxury sedan rolled in silently, its windows tinted, its presence unmistakable. It stopped directly in front of the hotel entrance. A second car followed. Then a third. Guests turned to look. Conversations paused. The security guard straightened instinctively. Dalton's chest tightened. "What's this about?" he asked. No one in particular. The doors of the first car opened. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, scanning the entrance with urgency, then another, and another. They moved quickly, purposefully. Steven stepped forward. "Mr. Seagal." He extended his hand immediately. "We're so sorry for the delay, sir." Steven shook his hand calmly. "It's all right." Dalton's stomach dropped. "What?" he whispered. The executives entered the lobby with Steven at their center. The room fell silent as if someone had turned off the sound. Emily's eyes widened. The security guard froze. Dalton stepped out from behind the desk, forcing a smile. "Gentlemen, can I help you?" The lead executive didn't look at him. "Mr. Seagal," he said respectfully. We've prepared all the documents. We weren't expecting you to arrive personally tonight. Dalton's smile cracked. Mr. Seagal? Steven nodded slightly. I wanted to see the place for myself. A murmur rippled through the lobby. A guest whispered, "Did he say Seagal?" Dalton laughed nervously. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake." The executive finally turned to him, his expression cold. "There's no mistake." He opened a leather folder and held it up. "Steven Seagal is the majority owner of the Royal Crown Hotel Group." The words landed like thunder. Dalton felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible," he stammered. He just walked in asking for a room." "Yes," the executive replied. "And you denied him." The lobby was frozen. Emily covered her mouth. Steven looked around slowly, taking in every face, every reaction. "I asked for the cheapest room," he said calmly. "I was told there was no room for me." Dalton swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know who you were." Steven met his eyes. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly why I came without announcing myself." Dalton's knees trembled. "I wanted to see how people here treat a guest they believe has no power." Steven turned slightly toward Emily. "She apologized," he said. "She showed respect when she didn't have to." Dalton tried to speak. No words came out. One of the executives closed the folder. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "you are aware that your behavior tonight is a direct violation of company policy." Dalton's voice cracked. "Please, let me explain." Steven raised a hand. "Not now," he said gently. He turned to the lobby. "To everyone here," Steven continued, "this hotel prides itself on luxury, but luxury without dignity is meaningless." The silence was absolute. Dalton realized, in that moment, that his world, his authority, his confidence, his arrogance, was already gone. And the worst part, Steven Seagal hadn't raised his voice once. The silence in the lobby felt heavy, almost suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. Mr. Dalton stood frozen in front of the desk he had ruled for years. The confidence that once filled his posture was gone, replaced by fear creeping into every line of his face. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to steady his breath. I can explain," he said again, his voice barely holding together. Steven Seagal didn't respond immediately. He walked slowly across the lobby, his footsteps calm and measured, as if the chaos around him didn't exist. Guests instinctively stepped aside to give him space. He stopped near the seating area and turned back toward Dalton. "Please," Dalton said, his voice cracking now. "I didn't know who you were, if I had." Steven raised his hand gently. "That's not an explanation," he said. "That's a confession." Dalton's shoulders slumped. Steven continued, his voice steady but firm. "You didn't treat me poorly because you thought I was unimportant. You treated me poorly because you believed you could." A murmur spread through the guests. The executives exchanged quiet looks. One of them, an older man with silver hair, stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "your conduct tonight was observed by guests, staff, and now the owner himself." Dalton wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, I've given years to this hotel. I was only trying to maintain standards." Steven looked at him sharply. "Standards without humanity are just excuses." Emily stood behind the desk, her hands clasped tightly together. She hadn't moved since Steven returned. Her heart pounded as she watched the man who had humiliated her countless times struggle to stand upright. Steven noticed her again. "Emily," he said gently. She looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. How long have you worked here?" 3 years, she answered softly. "And how many times?" Steven asked. "Have you seen guests treated differently because of how they looked?" Emily hesitated. Dalton shot her a warning glance. Steven noticed that too. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. Emily swallowed. "Too many times," she admitted. "Sometimes people leave without saying a word. Sometimes they leave angry, but it always starts the same way." The guests listened closely now. Steven nodded. "Thank you for being honest." Dalton took a step forward, desperation spilling over. "Sir, this isn't fair. One mistake shouldn't erase everything." Steven turned to face him fully. "This wasn't one mistake," he said calmly. This was a pattern. Dalton's legs buckled slightly. The silver-haired executive spoke again. Mr. Dalton, effective immediately, you are suspended pending formal termination review. The words hit like a hammer. Dalton's mouth fell open. Suspended. You can't do this. Steven interrupted him. You're right, he said. I can't. Dalton's eyes flickered with hope. But the culture you created here did, Steven continued. Dalton collapsed into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. Steven turned to the staff. Everyone here deserves respect, he said. From guests, from management, from ownership. He looked at Emily once more. Earlier tonight, Steven said, you apologized to a stranger when you didn't have to. Emily nodded nervously. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Dalton looked up sharply. Wait, from this moment, Steven said calmly. Emily will serve as interim front desk supervisor. Emily gasped. Sir, you earned it. Steven replied simply. Applause broke out, soft at first, then stronger. Guests who had witnessed the humiliation now watched a moment of justice unfold. Dalton stood slowly, his face pale. Security, the executive said gently but firmly. Please escort Mr. Dalton to his office to collect his belongings. The same guard who had been unsure earlier stepped forward with confidence now. Dalton didn't resist. As he was led away, he looked back one last time at the lobby, the place where he once felt untouchable. Steven watched him go, expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the front desk. I believe, he said calmly. I was asking for a room. Emily nodded quickly, her hand shaking as she reached for the keys. Yes, sir. We have the presidential suite available. Steven smiled faintly. That won't be necessary. The lobby exhaled collectively. All I needed, Steven said, was respect. The lobby slowly began to breathe again. Guests who had been frozen moments earlier shifted in their seats, whispering softly, still processing what they had just witnessed. Some glanced toward the front desk. Others looked at Steven Seagal as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a celebrity, not as an owner, but as something rarer. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Emily stood behind the desk, staring at the room keys in her hand. Her heart was racing, her thoughts scattered. Only minutes ago, she had been a quiet receptionist afraid to speak. Now, every eye in the lobby carried a new kind of respect when it turned toward her. Steven noticed her hesitation. Take your time, he said gently. She nodded, took a slow breath, and straightened her posture. For the first time that night, she looked confident. Yes, sir, she said. Steven turned to the executives. I'd like a brief walk through the property tomorrow morning, he said calmly. No announcements, no special treatment. One of them nodded immediately. Of course. Steven glanced around the lobby once more. I want to understand how things really work here, he added, not how reports say they work. The executives exchanged knowing looks. They understood exactly what he meant. Steven then picked up his small travel bag from the floor and stepped toward the elevators. As he did, something unexpected happened. A guest, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, stood up. I just want to say, the man began hesitantly, I've stayed in hotels all over the world. I've never seen an owner show up like this. Others nodded. Steven paused and turned slightly. This isn't about ownership, he said. It's about responsibility. The man smiled. Well, thank you. Steven inclined his head and continued toward the elevator. As the doors closed, the lobby buzzed quietly with conversation. Phones came out. Messages were typed. The story of what had happened was already spreading beyond the hotel walls. Behind the scenes, Dalton sat alone in his office, staring at a half-packed box. The gold watch that once symbolized his power lay heavy in his palm. Every laugh, every insult, every moment of pride replayed in his mind. For the first time, there was no one beneath him. Only consequences. Downstairs, Emily guided the night staff with a calm authority that surprised even herself. She didn't bark orders. She didn't humiliate anyone. She simply treated people the way she wished she had always been treated. A young bellhop approached her quietly. You handled that really well, he said. Emily smiled faintly. I just did what felt right. Meanwhile, Steven reached his room, not the presidential suite, but a modest corner room overlooking the city. He placed his bag down, removed his jacket, and stood by the window. The city lights flickered below like distant stars. He had seen this scene play out in different forms many times before. Different places, different faces. Same lesson. People confuse status with worth. His phone buzzed. A message from one of the executives, security footage saved. HR process initiated, staff feedback requested. Steven typed back a short reply, listen more than you speak. He set the phone aside and sat down. For him, the night wasn't about proving power. It was about confirming a truth he already knew. The way someone treats a stranger reveals more than how they treat a VIP. The next morning, as sunlight poured into the lobby, something felt different. Staff greeted guests with genuine warmth, not forced smiles. The tension that once lingered behind the desk was gone. Dalton's nameplate had already been removed. Emily stood taller. Steven walked through the lobby quietly, unnoticed by most this time. As he reached the exit, Emily stepped forward. "Sir," she said softly. "Thank you." Steven smiled. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes," she replied. "I do. You reminded us that kindness matters, even when it costs something." Steven nodded once. "That's the only time it really matters," he said. He stepped outside into the morning light, leaving behind a hotel that would never operate the same way again. Not because a manager was removed, but because a lesson had finally been learned. Morning sunlight filled the lobby of the Royal Crown Hotel, spilling across the marble floors and polished counters. It looked the same as it always had, luxurious, elegant, impressive. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Steven Seagal walked through the lobby quietly, dressed just as simply as the night before. No announcements followed him. No staff rushed to impress him. That was exactly how he wanted it. He stopped near the front desk, watching silently. A guest approached, hesitating, dressed plainly, travel. Worn like Steven had been the night before. Emily greeted him warmly, smiling without judgment. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" Steven watched closely. The guest relaxed immediately. "I'm hoping you might have a room available." Emily checked the system carefully. "We do. Let me see what works best for you." No sighs, no eye rolls. No assumptions, Steven nodded to himself. One eye one, he observed small interactions. Staff helping guests patiently, listening instead of rushing, treating everyone the same, whether they carried designer bags or old backpacks. This was the real test later that morning. Steven gathered the executives in a quiet conference room. "I don't want this incident buried," he said calmly. "I want it learned from." One executive shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the legal team recommends keeping it internal." Steven looked at him steadily. Respect doesn't grow in silence. The room went still. "We'll retrain every manager," Steven continued. "Not on procedures, but on people. Anyone who believes power means superiority doesn't belong here." The executives nodded. Steven stood and walked to the window. Luxury is easy to sell. Dignity is not. That's what will set this place apart. Meanwhile, in a small office away from the lobby, Dalton sat alone. His termination letter lay open on the desk. The words felt heavy, permanent. For years he had believed authority made him untouchable. Now, stripped of title and position, he saw something he had avoided for a long time. Himself. He remembered the way Steven had stood calmly at the counter. The restraint, the dignity, the silence that spoke louder than any argument. Dalton closed his eyes. He hadn't lost his job because of one guest. He had lost it because of who he had become. Back in the lobby, Steven prepared to leave. Emily approached him, holding a small envelope. "Sir," she said softly, "the staff wanted you to have this." Inside was a handwritten note. Simple, honest. "Thank you for seeing us." Steven folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. "That means more to me than you know," he said. Emily hesitated. Will you come back?" Steven smiled faintly. "I was never really gone." As he stepped outside, a guest who had witnessed everything the night before called out. "Sir." Steven turned. The guest nodded respectfully. "You didn't have to do what you did." Steven met his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. I did. The black car waited at the curb, but Steven didn't rush toward it. He took one last look at the building behind him. It wasn't just a hotel anymore. It was a reminder. A reminder that true power doesn't humiliate. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition. True power listens. True power waits. True power shows respect, especially when it would be easier not to. As the car pulled away, the Royal Crown Hotel returned to its daily rhythm. Guests checked in, staff smiled. Life moved forward. But something invisible had shifted, and for everyone who witnessed that quiet confrontation, the manager who fell, the employee who rose, the guests who learned, and the man who never raised his voice, one truth remained clear: the way you treat people when you think it doesn't matter is exactly who you are. Weeks passed after the night that changed everything at the Royal Crown Hotel. From the outside, nothing seemed different. The same polished glass doors, the same chandeliers, the same luxury that drew people in. But inside, something unseen had shifted, something deeper than policy or procedure. People noticed it first in the small moments. A guest with tired eyes and worn luggage was greeted with the same warmth as a celebrity. A family unsure if they could afford an extra night was treated with patience instead of pressure. Employees spoke to one another with respect, no longer afraid of being humiliated for mistakes. The hotel felt lighter. Emily stood behind the front desk one afternoon, watching the lobby with quiet pride. She didn't think of herself as a manager. She thought of herself as a guardian of the space, someone responsible not just for rooms and reservations, but for how people felt when they walked through those doors. She remembered the night Steven Seagal had been turned away. Not the shock, not the drama, but the calm, the way he never argued, the way he never defended himself, the way he let truth reveal itself without force. Across the city, Dalton sat alone in a small apartment, far from the world of marble floors and crystal lights. He had replayed that night hundreds of times in his mind, every word, every glance, every chance to stop before it was too late. He realized now that power hadn't corrupted him overnight. It had happened slowly. Each time he chose ego over empathy, control over compassion. Losing his job wasn't the real punishment. Losing respect, his own. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the hotel addressed simply to the man at the front desk that night. Emily opened it carefully. Inside were a few handwritten lines. "I didn't know who you were, but you reminded me who I should have been. Thank you." Emily folded the letter gently and placed it in her drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Steven Seagal never made a public statement about the incident. No press conference, no interviews, no headlines. That was intentional, because the lesson wasn't meant to be loud, it was meant to be remembered. The world teaches people to chase power, money, and status. It teaches them to admire confidence, even when it's built on cruelty. But that night at the Royal Crown revealed a different truth. The strongest person in the room was the one who didn't need to prove it. The most powerful voice was the one that stayed calm. And the greatest authority was shown through restraint. People will forget what you own. They will forget what you wear. They may even forget your name, but they will never forget how you made them feel when you had the choice to be kind or cruel. Somewhere right now, someone is being judged silently. Not because of who they are, but because of how they appear, because of where they came from, because of what others assume they lack. And somewhere else, someone is being tested without realizing it. Because every interaction is a test. Every moment of power, small or large, is a mirror. The night Steven Seagal was told, "No room for you," wasn't about a hotel. It was about humanity. It was about the quiet truth that respect doesn't require recognition, and that the person standing in front of you, no matter how ordinary they seem, might be far more important than you imagine. So the next time you're in a position to dismiss someone, to look down on them, to decide their worth in a glance, remember this story, because true power doesn't announce itself. It waits, and when it finally speaks, it doesn't shout. It teaches.